Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Peters. I am a Programs Associate at SmileTrain. Thank you all for joining us here today. As many of our attendees know firsthand, one challenging piece of having a facial difference can be explaining that to others. Whether it's to your family, your friends, school system, or workplace, a lack of understanding about cleft can foster uncomfortable social interactions. We are grateful to our panelists for joining us today to share their own cleft journeys and to discuss how they have successfully navigated these different systems. Thank you to Zeb Carabello, Ashley Barbour, and Iva Ballou. Let's get started. So Zeb, we'll start off with you. As someone who was born with cleft, who is also a father of a son with cleft, you bring a really unique perspective to this conversation. Your career as a high school teacher and board member of Face-to-Face Colorado adds additional layers to your experience when it comes to explaining what cleft is, especially within the classroom setting. Can you share with us a little bit about your journey?
Sure. Thank you very much. I appreciate the intro. So my name is Zeb Carabello. I'm 41 years old. I live in Denver, Colorado, and grew up here. And I was born with a unilateral cleft lip and palate back in the late 70s. So things were a little different back then. But I had, I would say, a fairly typical journey as far as growing up, not really knowing anyone else in my community who had a cleft except for me. And this is before the time of the internet, obviously, so I didn't kind of have that support. And, fast forward to years later where before we had our first kid, my wife, Megan, and I saw genetic specialists to look into what the possibilities were of having a cleft. And my first child, my daughter Maggie, was born without a cleft. And then 2 years later, my son Luca was born with a bilateral cleft lip and palate. And so I've really been able to see the cleft world through various spectrums. I've also been very involved in Children's Hospital Colorado's cleft lip and palate summer and winter camps up in Breckenridge, Colorado, which gives kids with clefts a chance to get together over 3 nights and really bond over what they have in common. But I think, through my journey, one thing I've really learned both growing up with it and being a father of a now 8-year-old son with a cleft is, having a cleft is not really black and white. There's a lot of gray area involved. I know talking to my co-panelists previously, they agree with me as well. And there's I know like as parents, as family members, people with clefts, we want to hear like, this is how you approach it this way. But I think like the main message is we really need to feel out the person with the cleft and see where they are on their journey. It really is a journey that it's a roller coaster in a lot of ways. There's ups, there's downs, there's many different phases. In that journey, I know my personal journey was that way. I know my son Luca has that going on right now. I think when you have a cleft, you can go weeks and months, maybe sometimes, and not think much about it. And then there can be some weeks where it's on your mind all the time, right? And all it takes is maybe a comment from someone else, right? And so being a dad of a kid with a cleft, I really tried to be aware of that. I don't want to be the guy with all the answers. I like to try to share my experience and my wisdom. But I also know this is Luca's journey where he kind of has to learn on his own, trial by fire as well. And through all the other kids with clefts I've worked with throughout the years, I've learned that no one's story is the same. And so really just respecting their journey, respecting that each person is different and listening and kind of feeling them out, being there to support where you can. I think it's great. SmileTrain is looking at the social, emotional needs of kids with clefts, because I feel like in general, for too long, we've heard the message, hey, they had this surgery, it's fixed. Now let's move on to the next kid. And that's not true. We know that's not true. And so I'm glad that this is reaching a wider audience, and I hope today is helpful.
Awesome. And you shared a little bit about navigating your experience as a father, but how have you really navigated sharing your experience and sharing Cleft with as a teacher or as a student?
So I've been lucky as a high school teacher. I teach at a large comprehensive high school, and I've had almost a dozen students with clefts over my 15 years teaching, which has been really, really cool to have that experience, to be up there and to work with them. And so I always, each year, the number of kids I have with clefts who I've taught, if they're still in the building, even if I'm not currently teaching them, I just do like a pizza lunch every year where we all get together. On the typical year, there's maybe 3, 4, or 5 of us. And kind of like I've learned at Cleft Camp, a lot of kids with clefts aren't super eager to talk about it like during the middle of the day. And so it's really, I do a little spiel of like, hey, I had a cleft, and I've talked to them about that before, but like, I just want us to be open about it. And I want you to know that like, we're kind of a brotherhood and a sisterhood, and I'm here for you. And now let's eat pizza and chill out. And that's kind of what it is. And I've just kind of learned over the years that to be around other people with clefts is very powerful. The kids don't even necessarily need to talk about it a lot. And that doesn't mean they're not absorbing it, listening, and growing from it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And it's amazing. You just kind of, it's amazing what you'll put out there and how much you get in return. And so I'm sure those kids are just learning from you, and that's amazing. So thank you. Next up, we have Ashley. As you've shared on your page, Cleft Love, your own comfort level and approach to talking about cleft publicly has evolved over the years. Can you talk to us about what has inspired this transformation for you and how your earlier experiences in school and in your professional life informed the cleft community activist that you have become?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, first of all. When I was growing up, I just wanted to blend in. I think it was because I'd been seen as different in so many different situations. There were so many times I was looked at by doctors and surgeons, or times I was stared at in the grocery store. And those examples are really just the tip of the iceberg. It got to a point, I think subconsciously, where I just didn't want to be looked at anymore. And so as a result, I became very good at hiding and blending in socially. So on the outside, I was bubbly and confident, and I made friends very easily. I learned how to be likable, but something that took me a really long time to realize, like until adulthood, is that even though there was this positive, friendly, bubbly person that I was most of the time, there was also a part of me that held a lot of shame for looking different. There were certain situations where I did find I was able to talk about my cleft, even back then when I was growing up. So in elementary school, every year I gave a presentation about my cleft. I would bring in baby pictures and talk about where the scars on my lip came from. And I even remember one year I brought a dentist mirror to the presentation just so I could show the kids in my class the fistula that was still in the roof of my mouth. But even though I got support from my classroom, and even though I looked happy on the outside, I still carried this deep-rooted shame that I kept secret. And it was a secret that I kept even from myself. So I wasn't able to talk about it, even if you wanted me to, because I didn't allow myself to even be aware of it. And in the past, I hadn't wanted to have much to do with the cleft community. I think in part it was because it reminded me that I was different, which I didn't like, but also it was just, for me, so painful. It reminded me of physically painful surgeries and appointments and various things that I had sort of tried to block out. But also I think if I admitted that I was different, then I would have to confront this shame that I felt about myself. But there was this one night in college, and I don't know why this night was any different from any other night, but for some reason I decided to Google cleft related information. And when I typed it into Google, pictures of beautiful cleft affected babies came up, and I remember I just started crying. And I was totally alone, but I can remember that it was late and I had the lights off, as if I didn't want anyone to see me. It was this raw and vulnerable version of me that I had barely seen. And so, I certainly didn't want anyone else to see it. So it was in the dark that night by myself that I was able to finally admit that, these babies I'm looking at, they're different. And these babies are like me, which must mean that I'm different too. And then after a few years went by, I found a Facebook group of cleft affected people. And this was the first time I had found people who looked like me, where there was, a number of them. And I remember noticing that I found these other cleft affected people to be just beautiful, amazing people. And I remember thinking, if I can find them beautiful, why do I have such a hard time seeing that in myself? And it was in that moment that I realized that I'm worthy of love and respect, and that I'm different, and I am also beautiful. I realized after that I didn't want children who are born like me to grow up and feel like being different and being beautiful are mutually exclusive. So my mission now with Cleft Love is simply to share my story and my voice. And my wish is that people hear it and that they feel hopeful, or maybe that they feel belonging. And mostly my wish is that people who hear my story realize that they're truly worthy exactly as they are, no matter what the world may have told them.
It's amazing to see, just to hear the growth that you had as an individual, and now you turned that into something really amazing, and you're sharing that with us today. Like, even that you're here sharing that with us is amazing and beautiful. So thank you so much, Ashley. And next up we have Iva. A main objective of your company, Real Sophisticated Joy, is to help teens and young adults develop and discover who they are. How has your personal experience with cleft informed the way that you approached your coaching?
I had a very similar story like Ashley. For a long time, I did not look in mirrors. I would actually wear a very long bang to cover up. I was born with a bilateral cleft lip and palate, over 30 corrective surgeries. And just the thought of saying that I had a cleft palate, I would never say that. I didn't want anything to do with it. I did feel a lot of shame and questioning of why was this happening to me. And then something around 26, there was just this transition of wanting to be happy with myself, wanting to be whole and heal with myself. And it was a writing experience that I did where I just wrote out every negative thing that I've ever thought about myself, all of the bullying that I have internally done to myself. And all of it stemmed from my cleft palate, being ashamed, being hurt about it. And it was as if once I did that writing experience and I got it all out, I felt lighter. I felt extremely lighter. And I wanted to reinvent of how I saw my cleft palate. I wanted to be confident. I wanted to be sophisticated. I wanted to be joyful. And so that was the words and emotions that I attached to my cleft palate. And it was like a shift. And once I did that, I wanted to help other people do that. I know a lot of us in the cleft community, as Zeb said, you can go months, days, and you're fine. And then you'll have a day, you might catch yourself in your reflection and you'll just feel away. I still get that feeling, but I have confidence in myself. I have confidence in my cleft. My cleft makes me special. And I really want to help others that's coming behind me to have that same confidence in themselves. So knowing that there is power in my cleft palate, there's power in that. I believe that we're all just superhuman people because of what we have to go through. The determination, all of the emotions of the surgeries. It's not easy to go through that. And so anyone that has ever had one cleft surgery, you are a superhero and you have power and you have confidence within you. And I want to help kids live that every day.
That's amazing. I feel like, and on top of that, it's empowering to be, even in a group like this, or in groups of other people that are born with cleft lip and palate. It's so empowering to be around those people. And so, Iva, how has your experience with cleft influenced the direction of your professional life?
I was always in the healthcare field. I always felt an internal drive to help someone else. I grew up in hospitals my whole entire life. There was always someone advocating for me in some form, whether it was my speech pathologist, whether it was my dentist, whether it was just even people at the insurance company saying, you know what, no, this is actually not a cosmetic thing. She needs this so that she can have a normal way of life. I've always had someone else advocating for me. So when it was time for me to go into the workforce, I wanted to be in healthcare so I could advocate for other people. And that was always my job. And I can remember just how many times that hearing a mother say, thank you, because of you, my child is going to be able to get the medicine that they need, and just crying on the phone because she was so happy. And knowing that I did that, it was as if I was paying back all of the grace and love that was given to me with my cleft. Because again, it's not easy to go through what we go through. And there was somebody on that other side that helped that go through. And so now I'm doing it for other people. That's
amazing. I feel like a common theme of everything that you guys have talked about today is, the topic of this conversation is navigating how to share your cleft. And a lot of it is being an advocate for cleft and sharing your personal experiences. And it's almost like a full circle, which is amazing. So our last question that we have today is for all of you. And what advice would you share with others who are struggling to explain their cleft to their family, their friends, their classmates, or their colleagues? And Ashley, we can start off with you.
Sure. So you can see by looking at my journey that I didn't always feel the same as I do now. There definitely have been times when I felt more or less okay with talking about my cleft. And I think it's important to note that that's okay. We're all at varying places on our cleft journey, and what works for one of us at a certain time in our life most likely won't work for everyone. And for parents, my advice is to just meet your child wherever they're at. If they want to talk about it with their class, that's great. But if they don't, it's important to realize that that's a perfectly fine choice too. Where your children are in a particular moment also doesn't mean that that's where they'll end up staying. Ultimately, they just need to know that you love and support them no matter where they're at on their own journey. But for those kids who are interested in sharing more about their cleft, I found the talks that I gave to my classes very helpful. It seemed like for me, once kids understood why I looked the way I did or why I talked the way that I did, they were a lot more accepting overall. And I found as an adult, grown-up people ask a lot fewer questions. Mostly, I think, because people are taught that it's impolite to call attention to difference. But because I work with children, the question still comes up sometimes, what happened to your lip? And to be honest, when I'm not expecting the question, it can sometimes catch me off guard. So I usually pause and I take a deep breath, kind of regulate myself. And then I just say, I was born a little differently. You see my lip right here and here. When I was born, they weren't connected. And the same is true with the roof of my mouth. That part of your mouth where peanut butter gets stuck sometimes. When I was born, I didn't really have that part of my mouth. So I had to have some surgeries so that they could sew everything closed. And now I just have some scars. And an answer that's as simple as that usually satisfies them, and then they're ready to move on.
Awesome, thank you. I love the simplified version. The peanut butter on the mouth is a great kind of way to, I don't think people usually talk about palates of their mouth. So that's a really good analogy. So next up we'll have Iva. Do you have any advice for friends or family or classmates?
Yes, I have 3 tips. The first one is excellent communication. So whether you are the one with the cleft palate, knowing how you want to communicate that you have a cleft palate. As Ashley said, if you do not want to discuss it, you have that right to say, that's not something that I'm comfortable talking about. But if you do, knowing what you would say. And so parents, this is where you can come in, maybe having the talk of saying, hey buddy, if someone were to ask you about your scar, what would you say? How would you react to it? And then that way, by having those communications and getting that excellent communication, it helps build up your confidence in response. So when those times come where, again, like Ashley said, there's going to be times where you're not expecting it. I have been working, having a meeting, I'm presenting, and the question was asked. Now, mind you, that was not appropriate, but I was able to handle myself because I had already practiced my responses. I knew what I was going to say. So I have about 3 or 4 responses that I know I can always say. And sometimes as simple as, I was born that way, and we move on. But knowing what you want to say, how you want to say, and being confident in that. So even if that means that you have to do a little bit of role playing in front of the mirror and just giving your 3 or 4 responses, and that way you become so comfortable in them, when that time comes, it just rolls off your shoulder. And it's just, this is what it is. Or even again, I don't feel like talking about that today. This is why we're here.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Iva. And last, Zeb, do you have any advice for navigating how to share cleft?
I thought those were great tips that came before me, so thank you. But I mean, the only thing I think I would add is just the idea of educate, that I think it's really important that people know that we do educate them. We do live in the Google age right now, so it's pretty easy for people to get information. And so, especially today, I like to inform people that it's the most common birth defect in the world. It's, depending on where you read, between 1 in every 700 or 1 in every 750 babies born have cleft lip or a cleft palate, or a combination of the two. And so we really should know about it. Obviously, if it's a little kid asking compared to an adult, is very different. But I think education is key. And I think there's also the idea about, I really do think the vast majority of people who ask are curious, right? They're not trying to be, they're not trying to insult you or make you feel bad about it. They're just curious. Although even sometimes, even though the question is curious and innocent, that doesn't mean it can't ruin the kid's day with a cleft, because it often will. Even if there's no malicious intent at all, it can still bring them down. But I just think being prepared, as the other panelists have said, just having a couple answers on hand, depending on your mood that day, right? One day it might be, I was born this way. Another day it might be, do you know it's the most common birth defect in the world, and blah, 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 right? Here's Smile Train's website for more information, right? But it just kind of depends on your mood that day and who's asking. But I think it's really good advice to be prepared.
Thank you, Zeb, Ashley, and Iva, for sharing your personal stories and your great advice just around how other cleft affected individuals may want to navigate explaining cleft to their network. All 3 of you are leaders within this community, and we are grateful. We are so grateful for your involvement and your contributions. Please visit each of our panelists' bios to learn more about their work or connect with them directly. And now we'll open the floor for a Q&A. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Q&A session. If you're just joining in, my name is Grace Peters, and I'm a Programs Associate at Smile Train. And I'm joined here today with Iva, Zeb, and Ashley. And we just had an amazing conversation about how to educate your networks about cleft and how to talk about your cleft within your different networks. And I invite anyone who has any questions or comments to write them in the chat box. We already have a few questions that have come through, so let's jump right in. Iva, whether you're an adult or a child, being prepared to answer questions about cleft is such good advice that you gave us. You mentioned that you have 3 to 4 canned responses, one of which is "I'm born that way." Can you share any other language that you might suggest to people who are looking to form their responses?
Yes. If it isn't an adult, I don't know, there's a ring back, but if it is an adult, I will go ahead and educate them. I will let them know that I have a bilateral cleft lip and palate. I was born that way, and I will give them more about cleft palate, whether it be statistics. And depending on if I have time, I have even whipped out my phone and shown my baby pictures or other pictures, letting them know. It's all about, number one for me, my comfortability of that day. If I'm, and the setting that they asked. But if I'm comfortable and I know that they're just wanting to know out of just pure curiosity, they've never seen, they want understanding, I will absolutely answer their question. Now, if it's and we all have been there where it's more so of being nosy, I was just born like this. And I have said it just that simple. For children, I've actually said, God made me this way. And her response was so cute. She was like, why? And I've said, he wanted to make me a little bit special. And so he gave me a cleft. And it was funny because when I said it, she was just like, okay. And we went back to playing. But again, it's when you say it confidently and you convey it to them, the questions kind of end after that. I've noticed, but when I was younger and I stammered over it and I was like, I don't know, and I didn't feel confident in it, then it seemed like it was a longer process and a period of trying to explain what it was.
Awesome. Thank you, Iva. Next up, we have a question that just came through. How do you, and this can be for all of you guys to answer, and we can start with Ashley, how do you guys deal with the look as a cleft mom? I get really defensive.
Oh, so again, it often depends on how I'm feeling that day. Again, like where I've been at along my journey. So there have been times like when I am, at Target or like at church and someone like keeps turning around and staring at me. And I sometimes will then just like stand like this. Whether that's the right thing or not, it's probably not the most confident thing, but some days I'm just not in the mood. But then there are other times where, I've stared back, or, I don't know that I have like the best responses for the look because that still gets me. So whoever asked that, I definitely know what you're talking about. But yeah, so I don't even know if I have like the best response. So I'm curious what the rest of you do because maybe I have some things to learn.
And Zeb, what is your response to that question?
I think as someone with a cleft and then having a son with a cleft is a little different. I would say as a parent, I'm actually way more defensive than as a look at my son than if the look was at me. I just think that's the nature of us, right? But I know kind of the older I got, if I was getting a look, I would return the look. That was just like one, again, it depended on my mood that day, right? Or kind of where I was in my own head. But a lot of times I would look back. And there was a time or two where it was actually like, it turned into a legit conversation. Oh, you kind of looked like a kid I used to go to school with. Well, it turns out that kid had a cleft too, right? And so they were just associating that. So yeah, but again, like kind of as Ashley said, I don't think there's like a silver bullet to it. is kind of the mood that day, but I did like the look back. I think it worked sometimes.
That's that's empowering. I feel like giving a look back is like, you know, you gave me the look, I'm gonna give you the look. And Iva, what's your response?
I do the same thing. I give the look back. Look back. And then depending on how I feel, I will then say, can I help you? And smile. And as Zeb said, a lot of times that will go into a conversation where I'm able to educate. But there is no right way to do it because, as we've all said, every day is changing. We are always on this journey with our cleft, and every day you're going to feel a new way about it. But I do understand, like, as mom and parents wanting to protect the child, because my mother was the same way. She did not like that, but you just give them the look.
That's awesome. And our next question, and Zeb, I'm going to direct this one at you. Can you please share your challenges while you're educating the child or adult? How do you overcome it?
I mean, you know, I think, honestly, I think the biggest challenge is sometimes there's an idea or a narrative out there of, you know, I've said this before, but like, hey, we did the lip repair, we did the palate repair, it's done. But I think Iva just brought this up, like, it's a journey. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint, and it will go into the 20s. For me, it did. Again, like every person's journey is different. But it really kind of, I just getting out of that mindset that I'm going to have this surgery and now things are going to be normal. That it's not necessarily ever going to be normal, but that's good because normal doesn't really exist, right? And as Ashley and I had said, like, I love my cleft now. Like, I wouldn't trade being born with the cleft for anything else, but that took me 23, 24 years to get there, you know? And so just kind of keeping that narrative out there about it being the journey. There's no silver bullet, there's no easy fix. I've talked to some kids and worked with some kids at the camp who, like, they are 15 years old and they are at that spot that took me 25 years to get to, you know? And then you talk to some kids who are just really, there's some kids who really struggle at that same age. So again, just really respecting it. I do think with the internet now, and like just today, there's so many great organizations out there that were not there when a lot of us were growing up. So keep, you know, spreading the love, sharing the information, educating.
Awesome. Thank you, Zeb. And Ashley, one question that came in is, one comment that you made really stuck with me. And that was when you said, I'm worthy of love and respect, and I'm different, and I'm also beautiful. For all the people who have joined us here today and are on different parts of their own journey, can you speak to this sentiment and how it helps to propel you forward?
So I think in our society, there is sort of a beauty standard. And if you deviate at all from that beauty standard, then you're not seen as beautiful. And also within our society, often beauty and worthiness often go hand in hand as well. And so I think I've noticed a shift culturally recently where there's been more of an acceptance of differences across the board, which is so important. And so I think now is the time to just show that facial differences too are beautiful, and we all have something to offer, and we have amazing stories and the strength that our stories have given us. And so I think just reminding yourself that just because you maybe don't fit what has been traditionally beautiful in the past doesn't mean that you're not beautiful, and it doesn't mean that you're not absolutely worthy.
Thank you, Ashley. And we have time for one more question. Zeb, you mentioned that you have been involved with the Children's Hospital Colorado Cleft Lip and Palate summer and winter camps. Can you share more about these camps and the sorts of activities that are offered?
Yeah, sure. Jamie Eilberg, who I believe is part of this conference right now, and she's the clinic coordinator at the local children's hospital in Denver. And for, I think, approaching 20 years now, they've run a camp up in the mountains here in Breckenridge, Colorado. And typically it's kids about age 8 to 18. And there's 15 to 20 kids per camp, and it's 3 nights, and they all have clefts, and that's like the big thing they have in common. There's only about 1 hour out of it where we do what's called the sharing circle, where we share out our journeys. We talk about things like what surgeries are coming up, what are some tips you have for surgeries, how do you deal with the look, how do you deal with educating your networks about clefts, right? Is really the best thing, I think, is for the older kids in the group, you know, the high school, middle school age, they're doling out advice to the younger kids. And that's really powerful for the young kids to look up and get that advice from people they really respect. I think it's really empowering for the older kids to be in that mentor position. I think like all of us on this panel have learned a great way eventually to kind of deal with having a cleft is to get back and try to empower others. And so it's just an amazing camp. We added a winter camp a few years back, so now it's twice a year. I know there's some other hospitals around the country who do something similar, and I hope, I don't know if there's anyone on here who maybe has that power to do it through a local children's hospital, or maybe a Smile Train grant or something like that. I think that'd be an amazing opportunity, because just having those kids together, again, we only have about 1 hour of the camp where we really talk about it, and the rest of the time is just camp. But just being around the other kids with clefts and really absorbing that is really, it really is life-changing for those kids.
That's amazing. And just to wrap up this session, thank you, all 3 of you, so much for your time and sharing your stories and your advice about how to educate networks. I feel like it's a process. It's definitely something that, you know, you have to try out, but it might not work the first time, but then you try it again and it might work. And it's just amazing to see and hear all the great experiences that you guys have had, and it's so empowering. So thank you so much. And for those of you who are watching, if you'd like to learn more about Iva, Ashley, and Zeb, please go to their bios in the session. Thank you.